My name is Elizabeth Garcon. I am a senior consultant at Qvest. So today's fireside chat was inspired by recent research relating to women in the workplace. And it says it in your program, but something that we found really intriguing was that women are 20% less likely to receive actionable feedback that is then directly related to their performance and growth at work. So we also know that without that direct feedback, and specifically if women don't have direct feedback in their performance reviews that is related to company initiatives and their professional accomplishments and experiences, that can then lead to women not being promoted in the future. So as women are often receiving feedback, we're also often in the position where we're the ones giving feedback to others. So we really wanted to explore this pertinent topic, but through conversation with 3 female executives that I am very excited to introduce to you all today. Quick note on logistics, we're planning, I know we're running a little late, but hoping for about 20 minutes of discussion, and then we are hoping we can have at least 5 minutes for some questions if you have any now or towards the end. All right, so with that, I am pleased to introduce the folks who will be on our 3-person fireside chat with you all today. The first person I will introduce is Renee McGinnis. Renee is the Executive Vice President at Lionsgate Entertainment. Yes, welcome. Doing the intro, beautiful. All right, next we have Michelle Huynh. Michelle is the head of production and technology operations at Netflix. And last but not least, I would love to introduce you all to our moderator for today, Vanessa Fiola. Vanessa is an executive vice president and partner at Qvest. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Welcome, everybody. Very excited to have this topic today with Renee and Michelle. So we'll just kick it right off in the interest of time, but how has your own experience receiving feedback shaped the way that you provide feedback, Renee?
So I feel like I've had a lot of great feedback, but early in my career, I was a consultant, and I had some of the best knowledge, that little tidbit of making sure as a young female trying to make her place in a male-dominated world, to not admit to knowing how to make coffee or to taking notes particularly well, because you kind of have that, hey, could you get this? Hey, can you drive that? And as a people pleaser, that was really helpful information to know not only what I should be doing, but what I shouldn't be doing to make sure that I'm seen as an equal and a peer. So I thought that was like something kind of out of the gate that I thought was really super helpful, and I've kept with me that a number of times. And then I think just now we had people come in and ask us if we were the makeup artist in the green room. So it was kind of funny. I was like, oh, I've got feedback.
It was fitting for today, and the importance of amplifying women's voices. Michelle, what about your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's similar to Renee, having, obviously been in the industry for over 20 years and being on either ends, right? As you're progressing in your career, there's always a inflection point where now you're sitting in that seat and acknowledging that you are now in that position of authority and being very intentional with your words, being empathetic, and always assuming good intentions. And I think for me, having gone through that cycle and evolving my career as I have, it's incredibly important to just be able to see the human side, and that it takes immense courage for somebody to offer feedback. And feedback, by the way, can be both positive as well as ways to improve.
Right. I think that's so funny because we were talking about that with Nicole from Apple earlier, but yes, that it's a loaded term, right? It can be many things. One of the things that is interesting, I think, that I've heard along the way is that the more sort of senior you become in your career, or experienced you become in your career, that the lonelier it gets as Oh.
Sorry, by the way, I have to
warmer
interrupt. Sorry,
it gets.
and I did this on purpose because I needed to interrupt you. The smoke that you see in here, this is a sound stage, so there's a haze going on. 4 people have come up and like, is there a fire behind that screen? We're all right. I just want everybody to know. Sorry, I did not mean to interrupt your panel, but I also thought that was a cute way to interrupt it. But we're not. There's no fire hazard. If there is, I'll come on and be like, let's go, everybody orderly to the exit. Anyways, great conversation. Continue it. Sorry for the break. Now return to our regularly scheduled program.
That's actually perfect, Guy, because as we were walking on stage, I said to Michelle, like, are we going to burn down? So I'm ready for, I know, I'm ready for anything, but okay. Just back to that I think someone that I was acquainted with had said, the more you progress in your career, the lonelier it gets in terms of the availability of feedback to you. And Harvard Business School professor Robert Kaplan has published a great deal of studies about the more senior you become, that maybe the more honest feedback is by polling more junior members surrounding you. And I guess I wanted to ask you both about that in terms of what have you done have you experienced that sort of dearth of feedback, and what have you done about it personally?
I always actively solicit feedback. Whether it's a one-on-one, whether it's a group session, whether it's part of the performance review, etc. I think it's incredibly powerful to always leave that space. And it doesn't come naturally for most people. And I think the position that I'm in, but also, actively saying, is there anything that I can do to support you? I think that's when people take a pause and be like, I just gave you a bunch of updates, but here's where the challenges are. Here's where I need you to step in and help guide the project, or give any personal guidance in personal growth development, etc. But, to your point or your question around junior level employees, I would say that also with peers, and also, superiors or leadership as well. I think, the current company that I'm in, there is certainly a culture that we embrace. And that's how we believe we can elevate each other, right? And so we can dive into it later, but I think it's really about setting the right tone, the environment, and leaning into that culture of openness and candor.
Yeah, I feel the same. I feel that it's interesting for being, as an executive, getting feedback from my team is always something that I want to get honest feedback. And so I do often ask, like, how did that go? Like, could we have done better? Did we get the point that we wanted to make? Or are we selling the product that we want to deliver to you properly? And so I think it's always good to kind of ask the questions. I think typically because the relationship that we have is with the team members is like built on true friendship. And I think that people feel very comfortable asking the questions and saying, why did we do that? Or what was that approach? Or how are we handling that? I think it's important to get there. And then also we have a lot of business resources, like our peers, that I feel like I always want to reach out to and make sure that we're kind of aligned on and how did we do? How did we support you from a business perspective?
That's great. And so pivoting just a little bit into giving feedback or even receiving feedback, but how can feedback be tailored to recognize and appreciate disparate or diverse communication styles?
I mean, some people you have to be very direct with. Like, I've had a couple of times where I have people that really like to talk and they think they know the answer and aren't as necessarily good at like listening in. And so I had tried a couple of times to go lightly with that discussion, and finally I think the most direct is like, you need to stop talking and listen a little bit so that you might be able to understand a different perspective. But that worked with that particular person. I think that would break another, you have to know the people. And so if the soft touch isn't working, you have to continue to push the feedback so that they can actually hear and recognize that this is not effective, and kind of going through that, I think is really, it's challenging because it's hard to like change people, like their mindsets of who they are and fundamentally how they want to perceive themselves. But if they're not seeing like and getting that there's other options and ways to go through a project and that other people are bringing to the table, even if they're very, very smart, very, very smart, there's always room for feedback. And, you know, I think that's the case with a lot of people. We can always use, like, no one's perfect, and so we can always use, like, a way to tailor a conversation or tailor how we can be more productive as a team as opposed to an individual.
That's great.
And I would just add that there's no wrong way to give feedback. It's whatever way that you feel most comfortable, whether it's an email, a Slack message, setting up a one-on-one, right? I'm sure many of the leaders in this room have done some sort of leadership exercise where, you know, you take a test, a survey of sorts, and you kind of predict where you are within this 4 quadrant, right? Whether you're authoritative, that's your natural state, whether you're somebody who leans into relationship and more on the feeling side, whether you're more analytical, and so on and so forth. And I think using that as sort of a baseline, I think it's incredibly helpful. So, you know, obviously if you have a shorthand with somebody, by all means, be direct. But if you don't, and you're trying to assess what is the most optimal way for me to engage in this conversation and provide something that is seemed as constructive, and the reaction you don't want is for them to feel defensive, right? And so I think identifying what you believe their personality trait or their preference is, and lean into that. Because if somebody is more relationship oriented, you might want to start with how's your day going, right? And what I said before about leaning into empathy, you just don't know what happened in their personal life or what have you that might have manifested it itself in the reason why you want to feel like you need to give them feedback. And so I think, you know, there's a lot of EQ that's involved and leaning into that strength and using the signals that's offered to you, right? Because if somebody is having a crappy day, that's probably not the day you want to give them feedback, right? And so I think choose the right moment, but also lean into that courage. Because I think if the other party feels that you're coming in with good intent, and you have to be careful with your words, but you know, then it's going to be felt, because at the end of the day, the core thread that unifies us is that we're humans and we're here for a reason and we have a common goal. And so I always say, let's index on that. We might have different approaches, but at the end of the day, we want the same thing.
I think that's great, and I think one of the things that just as we've gone through this process of preparing for our conversation today, I think I found remarkable is just leading with that empathy and EQ that I've heard from both of your feedback. You've both worked across. We were joking earlier that between the two of you, you've got all the studios covered in the history in your experience. And so, how has your individual experience, the experience of feedback, and the culture of feedback at the various places that you've worked over the years, like how has that shifted for you in your experience and what you've witnessed along the way, and any sort of gems to pull out from that?
I mean, I think the idea of performance conversations have changed, or like over time, over my career, I think it used to be a kind of lot of writing and recapping specific goals and like activities that you completed and successfully completed, and it was just more like recapping everything you had done. And then in more recent years, we've been making it or tuning it more towards a performance conversation, so it's less formal and like a recap of the workload that you've done, but the big picture of how have you succeeded in the organization, what have you contributed from a kind of high level, and not just specific like I did this, but overall, how are you growing as a person? How are you advancing your career? And having those conversations that are kind of bigger and less specific as far as the career, but like really helpful in knowing the direction that you want that resource or that colleague that they want to go with their career, so you can kind of help foster a feeling of like, this isn't just a job that I'm checking off the list, but I am building a career and I'm doing it in a way that I'm supported and want in a direction that I want to go.
Yeah, and I always, I mean, in terms of, you know, the various places that I've worked at, and Renee as well, one thing that I've learned through the progression is real-time feedback. Don't let it fester. And I've seen that. And what I've seen and observed is it creates this toxicity where there's harboring of resentment or what have you. And I think if you don't wait too long, you know, back to my don't approach them on a crappy day, but certainly find the right moment to give that constructive feedback. And I think that that will go a long way to course correcting at the get-go versus a month, 2 months, a year into it. And then now there's a narrative and there's a meme that you have to demystify or debunk. And so I always lean into, let's just hash it out, whether it's a private conversation. Usually with executives, you get in a room and you talk through it, right? But if it's a more junior level colleague, you want to be a little bit more, you know, these are areas of improvement and development. And so just really understanding the moment and understanding the feedback and the action that you want from that feedback. The other thing that I will add is being specific matters a lot. I think, you know, Renee was just saying that. How many of you have received feedback where it started, hey, you did a really great job, but here's what you did, but you did a really great job, and it's just like this weird sandwich of positive, negative, positive. What do I do with this? And so I think just being very targeted, but human.
I feel like the sandwich was it landed here. People have experienced that. I heard it as well. Okay, so we're gonna, after this last question, we'll open it up to audience questions, but what is the single most valuable piece of feedback you've received in your professional career?
Well, I think I have an amazing mentor that I worked with for a really long time who might be sitting in the front row. And so it's been very helpful to have someone you can look up to. I mean, honestly, when I was in my 20s and I watched my boss, Teresa Miller, you know, manage family and kids and career with such you know, precision. She's working really hard, but also made sure that the family was really supported. It was the first time I really saw myself being like, I'm driven to succeed and be an executive as opposed to just like, I'll do my job and go home and do the necessary. I really thought I could see how it could work out. And I think having people, so the mentorships and I think the groups that we saw earlier, like the STEM Advantage and the different teams that are building women up, it just gives such an opportunity because when you can see yourself in a role and see like, oh, this is all the things that I want for myself in my life, it's really valuable to have like that constant like feedback loop, and then also finding people that you want to support to bring up in your career, because like it's only like, who cares if you've made it to the top and you didn't bring anyone along with you? Maybe you're okay with that, but like I'd rather, make sure that you're supporting other people because you don't want to have to work forever. So you might as well have some good people that you can leave as a legacy. So I think it's been really like helpful to have that. So.
That's great. 110% on mentorship and even sponsorship. I know we were talking about that as well. Having somebody who believes in you, who can help elevate you in those right moments, has been really, career changing for me. Is having somebody who sees you. For me, I think the single most important feedback that I've received is to bring others along on the journey. And I think sometimes we are so focused on the objective, the mission, that we forget that it is a team sport, right? And that, yeah, sure, I mean, you can be a genius and figure it out yourselves, but then you're the only one who is getting that accolade. And I'd rather have it be shared. But also, you know, bringing people along on the journey also means checking in. It also means ease the burden of change management. It also means less feedback towards the end. Because how many times have we ran a project and when we're almost at the last mile, oh, this thing, that thing, did you talk to that person, right? And so to save all that headache, just identify, or at least for me, is identify who's your primary partner, who's your contributor, and who just needs to stay aware, right? And identifying who ultimately are you doing this for, and ensuring that there's a business sponsor, executive champion, different words, different studios you have used over time, but certainly just the clarity in setting that expectation up front and narrowing down that problem statement before you begin that journey is going to save a lot of headache down the road.
Thank you. Thank you both for sharing your wisdom, your experience, and your perspectives. We would love to open it up to any questions from the audience.
Oh, yep.
Cool.
Yep, got a microphone here. Question here.
You don't have your open.
Fabulous conversation. Thank you. Beate Chalet, the growth architect, and also with co-chair for programming. I heard a differentiation the other day about growth versus strength feedback. Which one are you leaning in? Do you differentiate? So if you give feedback on growth opportunities or strength, natural, innate strength?
When just to clarify, because I do this, when we're giving feedback or when we're receiving feedback, or how we would like to receive feedback?
I think it goes both ways because it is a personal preference and it is how you lead others. Because I think that sometimes the growth feedback can go pretty bad the other way, whereas the strength is always good, right? Because you lean into what people are good at.
That's, I haven't put it into that perspective, so I clearly didn't do my research on the options. But I think identifying people's strength and then pairing it with where they want to go is probably where I would want to focus the feedback of like taking, okay, you do this really well. Maybe you're really detail-oriented and you want to go in this path with your career, but you don't have that big picture. Maybe you'd be better suited as like a tester or someone who's very focused and can get the detail-oriented work done and help them kind of document, business processes or manage that way. So like I think taking the strengths is really important and recognizing not everyone has the same strengths, but then trying to tailor it to the type of career that they want to grow into and see if you can maybe incrementally improve maybe the areas that they're not as strong with to like check out this, training course or check out this opportunity. Here's some things you can provide feedback for the weaknesses, but then also focus on, because I think a lot of people want to think of their job as a career and that they're like growing towards something and an end game and a goal. And I think just saying, well, you're not good at that, so you can't do it, I think would be really heartbreaking. But saying, here's where you're strong, let's see how we might fit you, maybe not the specific goal in mind of where you want to end up, but where it might lead you to a different career path.
Thank you for that question.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, hold on, we're here in the back. Oh, one male question. Should we?
Is that all right? Can a man
Should we
ask
honor
a question?
The dude's
Is that
brave
okay?
enough to ask a question. They better be
I'm a
good,
dude.
buddy. You're representing all of us.
So interesting. The feedback is tough, right? And asking for it is even harder. It's confrontation. Sometimes people perceive it that way. What advice would you have for maybe somebody younger in their career who's trying to get that advice and that feedback, and they have that moment where someone's not willing to give it, or it's a difficult personality to go after? How do you dive into that a little bit more?
I I experience that every day. I would just say I'm fortunate in that I work at a company that actually encourages that candor quite a bit. But if I were to reflect upon my career, I don't think it was great, because I think, we have to, as leaders, we have to lead by example in creating that space, and that safe space, I should say, for individuals to feel that they can speak up without, any consequence or perceived negativity that is going to reflect poorly on them in their relationship with that person. Especially hard when it's feedback given to a senior. And I think, I just, looking at my own experience, how have I done it? I think you always just have to level set, right? And you have to, whether you feel comfortable speaking from the heart or not, but you, at some, in some point, it's the strength of the relationship and the connection you have with that individual that you're giving the feedback to, and just leaning in.
And as leaders, I also agree that as long as you have that relationship with a junior colleague and you're making it, you give them the idea that you're accessible and that feedback that they want to give to you is something that you would receive. I think that's making sure that everyone feels confident and comfortable enough that you won't retaliate against some feedback, I think is important. I think sometimes it's scary, because then in certain people that might not be the case. So you just maybe work with someone else to find it.
Yeah, not everybody is the same, right? If it's Renee and I, it's like, open door.
Fine.
Good. Come talk to us. We want to hear the truth. But there's also value in talking to a colleague or a peer or a mentor, right? Because sometimes going to a very senior person, if you're a manager, a coordinator, what have you, can feel very scary and you can feel very vulnerable. But if you have a mentor, if you have somebody who can advocate for you, maybe try that route, right? It doesn't have to be you interfacing necessarily. It could be somebody that sponsors you and advocate for, hey, I think that was very harsh language that you used with so-and-so. I think there's a perspective here that you could gain, and you should talk to that person. And that has happened to me in my career, and I was lucky enough where that leader did reach out, and we had coffee, and it was great. There was no greater feeling than when you sometimes you come out of a feedback session or you have, some tension, right? It's an awful feeling because that sits with you for a long time, and it might actually even impact the way that you are operating with others. And I think finding a channel to just be able to address that early and timely is incredibly valuable. Or to Renee, don't work with that person.
Another question over here.
Hi, my name is Sarah Rostron, and first I would like to thank you guys for taking the time to step up on stage. That was a wonderful question. My question is as follows. If this has ever happened to you, how do you handle a situation with conflicting feedback that you received from various people, as well as how do you reconcile those differences?
That's a great question.
Vanessa, let's...
Yeah.
Well, just with conflicting feedback, sometimes the thing that I think about, or even feedback, if I may, is it Sarah, that maybe doesn't resonate, that doesn't fit. The thing that I try to keep in mind, and this is true of conflicting feedback, is that sometimes people don't have the words for what they want to say. And I used to have this writing coach in my other realm that would say to me, don't let the facts get in the way of the truth. And I always thought that was really meaningful because sometimes, we're the product of the vocabulary that we've been raised with, and so sometimes we don't have the words, but it's important to understand that if the facts aren't lined up, what are they really trying to say? And I do think it's important to contemplate feedback, even disparate or confusing or conflicting feedback, to just contemplate it. Quickly, an anecdote is years ago, 15 years ago in my career, my partner at the time said to me, he gave me feedback and he said, "You're defensive." And of course, when someone tells you you're defensive, you can't go, "No, I'm not." So, so it ended up being this really great moment for me because I developed this kind of trick which allows me to hear feedback that I don't necessarily understand or even in the moment agree with, and that is just to sit with it. And then over time, I figure out, like, did it fit? What of it was valuable for me to hear? So that would be my.
Final thoughts, Renee and Michelle? Oh, one more question. All right, final question. Sorry, we're going. By the way, we're eating into lunch, but it's pizza. No, it's pizza. So don't even. No, this is better. I think this is better than the pizza that's coming.
Hi. So a quick question. In companies, you have rounds of feedback that are given that is more formal, and as managers, there's also sort of feedback they can give as you go through the course of mentoring someone or working with someone. Sometimes that sort of off-course feedback is seen as unsolicited feedback. We've talked about retaliation as a theme. We've talked about having the space to create that for someone to be ready that you're working with, to be able to give that type of feedback or receive that type of feedback. How do you actually go about creating that space if the company culture doesn't have it? How do you create that space with teams?
Great question.
So that it's not unsolicited, it's not comes at a good time and comes in a good way?
I think when you're authentically yourself and like true to yourself and you reflect that in the conversations. I think kind of back to that, I was like thinking of the conflicting feedback is sometimes I think people would say you're kind of too casual in a meeting, and then some people will be like, I like that you're so casual. And so it's like hard to like kind of reconcile, like where do I line up and how do I behave and reflect while still being authentically me. And I think the best way to give space is to be who you are. Like, don't try and be like, wild and crazy if you're pretty calm, but like, give the space to like recognize that this is me and I'm open and honest and caring about you. So if you want to give me feedback or you want to solicit feedback from me, it feels like you feel comfortable to do that because you see someone as they are and not who they're trying to be as far as like, I'm businesswoman, So like, I think that's important.
Do you do that?
I do not do businesswoman.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I can imagine, which company are you with?
It's not reflective of my company, but it's Qvest.
Yeah, got it. Yeah, I mean, I always index upon the culture and the environment, right? Because I don't want you to come out of this forum and say, I'm empowered to give feedback to whoever, because that's probably not going to work out very well. I think it's more about, for me, I always like to establish relationship with people.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said before, feedback could also be positive, right? And so I think level setting and that person that's receiving the feedback needs to also be able to empathize with you. I think that's the best way for it to be received. Because if it's coming out of the blue, they don't know who you are, maybe they've seen you in many of the squares on a Zoom call or something, it's probably not going to land or resonate the way that you intend. And so I think just establishing that relationship and feeling that comfort with that person, and also, leaning into, hey, there's some great things and I want to work on this relationship, etc. But there are areas, or I saw you did this thing in the meeting and I saw the reactions of those in the room, whatever it is, but it's just being very specific on what you want the outcome to be. Because if it's feedback for just feedback's sake, probably not going to land well, because you might get something that's defensive. But if you're true on your feedback and say, this is what I would like, or this is how I see it progressing. Obviously, I'm in a position where I can ask more directly. I think that's going in with intentionality is important.
Thank you all. This has been really wonderful.
Thank you, Vanessa. Amazing. Renee, Michelle, it's great seeing you. What a great session, and I love the Q&A too. Thank you.